Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to the September edition of Molten Music Monthly. I don't know about you, but I've spent all week trying not to put the heating on, but then I don't need to and I have such lovely glowy things to keep me warm. But anyway, what do we have coming up this month? Well, Yamaha upgrade the MODX by adding a plus sign on the end. Instruō knock out a stereo oscillator and a West Coast function generator. Sovage Engineering says that if it sounds normal, something isn't working. Soundfreak pulls the Putney into Buchla. Modal have a crack at Eurorack. Winterbloom have an adorably small power supply. Flight of Harmony will starve your modular to destruction. Modbap have a wholly good percussion module. Native Instruments ushers in Komplete 14. Therevox pulls an oscillator out of the past. Korg goes all in on the Drumlogue. Intech will unknot your MIDI control. MiMU will have you handling Jellyfish. Magerit LANIAKEA goes cosmic. Moog resurrects the Model 10. Befaco puts a pony down on a VCO. Noise Engineering converts more modules into plugins. After Later Audio lets you roll your own complex oscillator. Synthfest is coming, but be prepared for Synth East. And Qubit want to examine the generated topology of feedback networks through sonar dispersion. But first, Detournetable. The detour of the table. The table of the detour. The detourning Detournetable. Well, this is like a Eurorack record player, right? It's a record player turntable that's been detoured, I suppose, through some form of control voltage and maybe a modelled plastic hand. Somehow incorporated into some awesome extension of modular ideas and concepts that flows through the rotational spin of the vinyl, through the generative vibrations of needle on vinyl, that results in the carrying of ideas and of emotions through control voltage into your music. That sounded really good. This is a thing, an object, an installation, if you like, created by Victoria Shen, a sound artist and instrument maker, who was inspired by the Make Noise Morphogeny and its ability to loop and sample and manage microsamples. And so somehow that took her down the road of pulling a turntable into Eurorack, but not just sitting a turntable next to modular, but building a turntable into the modular. I mean, it takes up the whole space, in all sorts of weird directions. But the result is incredibly striking to the point that I felt I just had to reach out and say, are you going to make these? Are you going to make them available? Because people are going to want them. This is going to be a desirable thing. We're all going to want to be sticking bits of vinyl and great big handy fingers with the nails into our Eurorack. We're going to be wanting to do that. But she said she doesn't really have any plans in making it into an instrument, but she will possibly custom made things, and people keep throwing large lumps of cash at her. Who knows? Anything is possible. But it's a fabulous thing. It's CV controllable in terms of speed and direction, and then the audio can be sucked in through your modular. I guess it's like taking the idea of a radio music or a radio receiver that you often see in Eurorack modules for generating sound, noise, something that you can latch into or lock into and use within your modular. And this, I guess, is doing a similar idea and allowing you to bring different sounds from different places randomly, possibly. At least, I've got no intention in how we use this into your modular. Fascinating. She's also really fascinated, and so am I now after hearing about them, by Audible Audibom cards. Never heard of that? No, I hadn't either. It's a remarkable thing that I think was basically invented in order to give people a way of hearing and identifying bird song. Why is that interesting? Well, it's a little thing built in the God knows when, sort of a handheld record player, but the records themselves are held on cards. You have a card, it's got a bird on the front which goes tweet, 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 and that tweet, tweet, tweet is recorded or engraved on a disc that's on the back of that card, and the record player turns around I suppose, on this box. You put the card on the box and you read the front, and it turns around and it plays the recording of the birdsong. Genius, just amazing. And she would very much like to resurrect that technology somehow in order to produce music in that form, which I think is just extraordinary. So there you go, something weird and wonderful to kick us off with this month. The Detournetable. Detournetable, amazing. Just go and check it out. So back into what some people would call proper synthesizers, big fat workstation Yamaha things that have multiple engines, multiple sorts of synthesis inside, all wrapped up in a big workstation machine that you don't need a door for. You can just make all of your music on this with every sort of sound you can imagine possible within the one interface. The MODX. It's not their flagship, that's the Montage. I think the MODX is the more user-friendly, cut-down, sort of cheerful version of that still gives you all of the welly of every sort of sound and every sort of synthesis, but in a more compact form. But what's very, very, very important is that they've just issued this major upgrade which completely revolutionises the entire line of MODX into the MODX Plus. What do you get for your Plus? You get a bit more polyphony. Hooray! 64 notes. Oh, I just keep running out of 64. 128 notes. Oh, fantastic, fantastic. And a bit more memory inside for samples. Oh, excellent. That is about it. That's your lot. That's considered a major upgrade enough to warrant an entire new change to the name type upgrade. So that's very exciting. Thank you, Yamaha. There were rumours that it was going to include the engine from the AM1X. They're almost classic now virtual analog synthesizer from back in the 90s, I think, early 2000s. But no, it wasn't to be. So here we are, the Yamaha MODX Plus. It's a little bit better than the one before. Now, Instruō were at DivKid's modular meets up in Leeds over the summer, and they had a couple of new modules. It's always exciting when Instruō have something new, partly because they're extraordinary and these modules are going to be awesome, and also because I get the opportunity to try to really murder the name of something. So, the first one is called cruïnn. Could be. Let's go for cruïnn. Yes. It's a stereo oscillator. And it uses something called through zero phase modulation. Not frequency modulation, I should add. It's phase modulation. So it uses phase modulation, through zero phase modulation, to add interesting animated textures. Essentially, I think what that means is that you take your standard sine wave, which looks a bit like that. And then you take another one and you put it out of phase, and then they shift and they wobble against each other, which is rather nice. You get these interesting tones. And what's fascinating about the cruïnn is that they've actually provided a little expansion module, which I think comes with it by default, which gives you every access of that sine wave. So the sine wave output in all of its phases. How is that useful? Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. The thing I find with Instruō modules is that my modular level and know-how is rocking about around here. Every now and again it goes, Instruō, they're up here somewhere. They are in another plane of existence, and they do fascinating and interesting things with their modules that I can't even pretend to describe, let alone master or become an authority on. I just like to sit back and look at it and go, wow, that's just amazing. I'd love to have a case of that to hang on my wall somewhere where it would never be used, but it would look absolutely gorgeous and just be dripping with that potential fantastic sound. So what this is all about ultimately is not actually sine waves, having looked at it again. It's actually sawtooth. It's about sawtooths running in parallel together to the point where I would almost say super saw, and I think that's essentially it. So what Instruō have attempted to capture here is essentially that Roland super saw sound where you just have these saws rubbing against each other in that deliciously gooey and moving phase modulated fashion. That's what it is. You see, I do know what I'm talking about, provided I get me facts right in the first place. The other one is cnōc. cnōc. I don't know. It's a dual function generator. So two functions, West Coast function style, which kind of means it's a bit of an envelope. But no, we don't call it an envelope. We call it a function because that's far more California, man. So it's kind of a rise and a fall, an A and an R, or an A or an S and an R. It has a bit of sustain potentially in there as well. 2 nice sliders on the front. Good, simple. It's the sort of, sort of module I would understand, I think. I think you can understand. That sort of envelope thing can also become an LFO, of course. Or it could also be a delayed gate signal, a slew generator, a portamento, things like that, which is quite interesting. It always makes me scratch my head to go, how can it and why can it be these things? But apparently it can, which is great. I mean, I guess you're just using a rise in voltage to change pitch as opposed to change level, and then, that's slew, portamento, glide, that kind of thing. I think so. Sovage Engineering has released a whole raft of new modules designed probably just to do generally nasty things. I mean, their motto apparently that if it's sounding nice and normal, then it's probably not working right. So their intention is just to mess, to mangle, to warp, to destroy, to crush, which sounds like fun. Good looking modules. They look a lot like the computer ones, which are just out of shot over there. But with kind of like a vintage black, and then these old style knobs on the front, very silver, interesting. I really like that kind of vibe. It's not like a vintage Moog vibe or anything like that. It's more of a vintage television set vibe, and that really appeals to me. The first model is Le Couturier, which apparently is it's an envelope which mimics the pick of a guitar, which is kind of strange. I mean, it's a dual envelope. You've got kind of the initial transient and then you've got something after that, and you're sculpting both of those things within this module. Fascinating. Next is Le Déchu. I mean, I'm making up the accent, but it just amuses me, so I'm just going to go with it. Okay, I mean no offence by any of my murdering of anybody else's language. I do apologise. It's my upbringing. Ultimately, that's I blame the parents. And this is an analog polymorphing voltage controlled oscillator and low frequency oscillator. So it modulates, it generates, and it crashes back into itself through various portals. Apparently it does terrible things to wave shaping. It takes that idea of a complex oscillator and then just squeezes the life out of it until it's no longer there. And the result is something interestingly characterful and potentially musical in the right hands. Next is the Ambianceurs, which is a voltage controlled LFO. Simple, nice, we like that sort of thing. And then you have Le Couture, which is some kind of distortion fella. It has a unique character as it filters the heck out of things in a distorted, broken kind of way. And then you have the Fail Temporel. I don't know what accent I'm using now. I don't think it matters, but this is apparently a time warping distortion. Just take a jump to the left, and it combines itself with lo-fi tape echo to create this extreme clipping distortion delay thing where there are no rules. There is no language to describe it. It purely exists as a way of mangling stuff. They've got other stuff as well, I'm sure, but I think that will probably do it. I found this particularly interesting. This is Soundfreak, which is essentially sound artist and synth engineer Alina Kalancia. And what she's done is pulled the VCS3, the Putney, that original EMS synthesizer, pulled the parts out and rejigged them and rebirthed them into the Buchla format, into the 4U larger modular format for Buchla. She's retained the look, which is quite stunning. There's something about the colour of those knobs. There's something about the look of those precision knobs, the coloured tops on them, and the front panel background. There's something about all of that that's so emotive, that so somehow hooks into us and stamps an immediately iconic vibe on to this particular synthesizer. And what she's done is she split it into 3 different sections. You've got the triple oscillator running by itself, so all 3 oscillators running in a single super wide. I mean, this is Buchla, so this is big. The real estate doesn't matter. We're not worried about how wide or big or expensive something is, because this is one of those other levels of modular, and it's just stunning. I mean, in the VCS3, what you tend to have is you've got 2 oscillators that you use for sound generation, and the 3rd oscillator you tend to use as an LFO, but it doesn't have to be. You can all be making noises if you want, which makes it a very fat sounding, very detunable and musical oscillator. The next section is a dual filter oscillator, because the filter can also self-oscillate, and therefore become another oscillator in its own right. And this is a little bit of a departure from the original, because they've added a band pass in there which you can push into this self-oscillation. And lastly, there's the envelope shaper and noise generator. I mean, the whole set essentially allows you to put that fabulous Putney EMS sound within your modular system. It's an extraordinary project. It looks fantastic. I don't imagine it's anything that I'd ever own, but it's just a thing of beauty. Modal have talked about doing Eurorack for a long time, and they've put around ideas like filters before in the past, but now finally, with the Filton, we have one. This is a dual analog ladder transistor filter, so a Moog style filter, I suppose, which has been pulled out of their 002, their flagship synthesizer. And what you get is a pair of beautifully mirrored filters within the one. It's quite striking module. I mean, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb in your modular in a general sense. I mean, it looks very much like a Waldorf type module, like the ones that they did. It has those very clean lines, those very contrasting colours. The special thing it likes to do is to morph through the various modes of the filter. Like, I think I've experienced this on the Cobalt 8, and perhaps in their other synthesizers. When you can change through filter types, the filter on the screen moves about to give you the different modes. I think that's what's going on in here. And this, of course, is dual, so it can be stereo. You can control it all from one side and link the two together, or you can use it completely independently. One slightly odd decision is that they've decided to float it on Kickstarter. I mean, this is not necessarily unusual for Modal. They've done that with the smaller craft synths and other bits and pieces as well. So it's not a new thing for them. But the goal they've set is 50,000, which is a lot of filters they're going to have to sell. And currently, with about a week to go, they're only halfway there. So I'm not quite sure what happens if they don't reach the goal. Does that mean they won't produce it, or they'll do something else? I don't know. That's the risk with the whole Kickstarter thing. It might not necessarily work out for you. And 50 grand to me just seemed a little bit on the ambitious side. And the other flip side of Kickstarter is that it bypasses your boutique shops and your modular shops, which is a shame, because really they could do with all the business they can get at the moment. So, you know, manufacturers out there, I really would run it through the little shops. I think is an awesome thing to do if you're able to. But hey, I don't know anything about what it takes to cost and manufacture a module, so I'm just sharing an opinion. But overall, I mean, it looks like a fantastic thing. Very, very grabbable. I like doing that with my hands. Very, very grabbable and usable, and will be interesting to get my hands on one. Now, Winterbloom, I know, have been struggling a bit with the old chip shortage. That's been very, very difficult for them. But they do have a new little thing for us, which is quite useful. It's a very mini Eurorack power supply. It's perfect if you're making a little lunchbox modular or a small form modular. It's very, very tiny and can fit up to the back of the case and push through a little DC jack for powering. It has two actual ports on the board itself, although of course you can add a flying bus cable in order to power a few more things from it. It has 18 watts of power in there, so it can power plenty, and you can also daisy chain them to other cases so that you can use the one wall wart power supply to power a number of Micronova power supplies. Micronova, did I say it was called Micronova? Yeah, there, that's what it's called. But Winterbloom also supplied as a bundle with an extra bus board with a few more ports on it for more powering, but also a front panel switch, which is interesting. So when I saw this originally, I thought the Micronova was the power supply, you know, module like that you'd put into a system, but no, that it's actually a bus board in the back, proper power supply going in the back of your case, which is much tidier. But then you have this option of this very small, slim front panel switch that will give you a light to show you that it's on, and a switch, and an ability to plug power in that way, so you don't necessarily have to have it sticking out the back. Anyway, it's a good size, good power, nicely made, nice and affordable. Now, I'm not sure who Flight of Harmony think they are, but they sound like a nice bunch of people. And then you look at their modules and you realise they're just out to kill you. That's all they want. They want blood, and they want the destruction of you and your system. Perhaps in an enormous fireball explosion, or gently and menacingly over time. Really odd. Their latest heinous module are called, I can't remember what they're called, are called Famine. You know, nice, it's very cheery, as you can imagine. What does Famine do? It slowly starves your system of power. So you plug your power supply into it, and then you power the rest of your modules from it, and it slowly starts to strangle the flow of electrons so that all of your modules start to behave badly or wrongly or strangely. If you've ever had a system where your power supply isn't quite fulfilling its full potential, then you may notice that modules behave strangely. They do funny things, strange things, unpredictable things. And this is a module designed to evoke that, to do it on purpose. Now, it's experimental. It could break things. You know, particularly if you've got digital modules which require a certain amount of power, when they are corruptible if you don't give them enough volts, you don't give them enough of what they need. It can cause serious damage. So use it with care. In other words, don't use it at all. But if that's the sort of thing you like, if you like the idea of putting together a system which you could set playing, and then you like the idea of it being slowly destroyed or strangled and being fascinated by the sort of behaviour of that, then this is definitely for you. Now this looks awesome. It was a one startling thing, I think, to come out of KnobCon, which was the other week as well, and this is the Trinity from Modbap. Modbap, who've given us the Osiris, a wavetable awesomeness, and the arcade smashing performer, I think it is, but this is a 3-channel digital percussion synth. You have a choice of 4 algorithmic sound engines which you can allocate to any one of the 3 channels, or all of them, I suppose. And the algorithms are called a block. Block is like the 808, 9 and 9 style sounds. Heap, which is all about partials and additive synthesis. Neon, which is about that lovely clanginess of FM. And Arcade, which is quirky and zappy and bangy and clashy. So it's like you can use these 4 algorithms to build yourself a little 3-piece kit of any kind of sound, of any combination of those sounds, and then just go to town on the modulation. There are all sorts of parameters to play with. Characterful stuff that's gripping, stuff that's pulling things apart, that's sweeping, that's gritting, that's sandpapering, that's rubbing slowly to the underside of something or other. And there's a nice fat character knob right in the middle, which is going to go from sort of leading man to femme fatale through to devastating hobbit. You know, that kind of character change, that arc, I think. And they also do clever things with triggering and mixing, where you can like trigger them all at the same time on a particular accent or emphasis, and then you can mix how they are being presented out of the outputs. Very interesting. I hope to have one of those in as part of my continuing and evidently infinite search for percussive sounds. Now, I thought I'd be really interested in Komplete 14, but I really can't seem to drum up any interest. Why is that? I mean, it used to be my everything. I've got old hard drives of older Komplete versions knocking around the place that I use for other things. I mean, it is without a doubt one of the biggest, most comprehensive and extraordinary collections of software instruments and effects that there is on the planet. It's amazing. It's extraordinary. I've lost my enthusiasm for it. I mean, one of the strange things that Native Instruments do is that they allow you to upgrade from any version for pretty much the same price. So at least this has been my experience in the past. It may have changed. I think now there's a subscription model and other sorts of ways of doing it. But historically, you pay the same price to upgrade from version 8 to version 9 as you do from version 4 to version 9, or 2 from version 9, and so on, and so on, and so on. So you tend to find that if you keep up with your upgrades and upgrade every time, you seem to be paying an awful lot of money every single time. Whereas you could skip a couple of version upgrades and then upgrade for the same price later on, which seems to be a much more efficient way of doing it, considering that the changes from version to version are, I mean, they're not insignificant, but they tend to be focused on the sound content, which is not necessarily the thing you want. You want a brand new, exciting, extraordinary synthesizer and instrument every single time. And that's not always the case. But at the moment, I have no clue. I haven't even looked at it. I'm going to look at it quick and then I'll fill you in. So what it's saying that I'll be getting, right, is playbox and randomization and chord generation and interesting generative things. I'll get a whole bunch of strings and bass guitars and electric guitars. I'll get Drake's keyboards, apparently. Whole bunch of expansions, melted vibes, Empire breaks, ignition keys, just tons and tons of stuff. But what I'm interested in actually is not expansions to sound, but actual new things. But in terms of synthesizers, we get BX Oberhausen, which is a take, I think, on the Oberheim synthesizer from Brainworks, and that's about it in synthesizers. On the sampling side, we get the new Contact 7, which is great. I mean, Contact is an extraordinary sample instrument. I use it a lot. I've got quite a lot of Contact library that I've acquired over the years, and so that does crop up from time to time, and it's become a very familiar place. But, you know, every time they do something interesting with Contact to improve that user interface, because that user interface is a bit gnarly. It's always been gnarly, kind of hard work, and like, oh my goodness, can't it just be easier? But thankfully, with most of the libraries you get for Contact, you just use their own GUI. You don't have to really deal with Contact particularly. But anything they can do to improve the browsing on that, I can never find anything that I'm after, then that is always very positive. So anyway, rather than just bamble on about random things, Native Instruments Complete 14 is an awesome collection of extraordinary sounds, extraordinary libraries, and if you are a computer-based musician, then it is something which is worth your time getting. At some point, it's going to be worth 500 quid to put that down in order to get it. And then you probably don't need to upgrade it for another 5 years. Because there's loads in there, so much stuff in there that you're never going to get to the end of it. And you get all the important stuff, like Contact, like Reactor, like the Super 8, which I've always really liked, Massive X. Those sorts of things are huge and worth the entry price on its own. So there you go. I did find interest in the end. Something else that came out of NobCon was the Therevox Ondes VCO. I think that's how you say it, Ondes. It's inspired by the Ondes Martineau. Now, Therevox are a company up in Canada, I think, who specialise in recreating or producing modern versions of the Ondes Martineau. Martineau. Let's go with the French, the Ondes Martineau, in a Spanish accent. I don't know. Essentially, the Ondes, right, it's an early electronic instrument made by some bloke called Martinet. And he had some interesting ideas about electronics and how all those sorts of things worked, and the Ondes Martineau was a extraordinary early synthesizer. It was all to do with valves and radio electronics and general sound design, Frankenstein weirdness. But what Therevox do is they take those ideas and those valves and tubes and convert them into solid state electronics and have produced some beautiful looking instruments which sound more like the Ondes Martineau but never sound like anything else. They have their own unique flavour and character. And with the Ondes VCO, what they've done is pulled out the oscillator. Now the oscillator works a bit like an organ. You have different sort of ranges that you can switch into it, and it has wave shaping and the mixing of waveforms in interesting ways. It has an organ vibe about it. There's something about the switches and the way things are labelled which gives the impression of different organ sections. But really what's going on is that the waveforms are being shaped differently, and so you have these switches in order to create a different character that comes out of the triangle core. You also get 3 outputs, and on the original machine I believe those were routed through different diffusers, which I think is something like a filter. So different destinations in order to sculpt those differently. Fascinating stuff. I don't really know what I'm talking about, but it's a beautiful thing. It's very, very nicely made. I love the very muted colours. I mean, there's a choice of colour as long as it's just this slightly off-white grey sort of colour, but there's 4 different tones of that. Just a beautiful thing, and if you look at the instruments that they make, it just fits perfectly with that. But it's a gorgeous thing that has no business being in the trashiness of Eurorack really, but hey, these are exciting times that we have access to such beauty and wonder within our brash and bold nuttiness. Next up is the Korg Drumlogue. The Drumlogue, yes, fitting in with the Mini Log and the Pro Log, Analog and other logs as well. What is it? It's 11 voice digital hybrid analog digital drum machine. It's a drum machine, people. We've known about this drum machine for a long time. It was softly revealed at many NAMMs ago, and we've been waiting and waiting, but now it's finally here. So what's cool about it? Well, it looks dark and mysterious. I mean, that's always a good starting point. So I think the basic idea is you've got 4 analog channels to do your kick, your snare, your hi-hats, that kind of thing. In a traditional analog style, you've got knobs for each of those. And then you've got a digital channel, which is essentially 7 digital channels, 6 sample channels, and 1 crazy SDK expansion log one, which can take any of those weird additional custom oscillators and bits and pieces that you can also plug into the MiMU XD or the Pro Log or the NTS1, that kind of thing, which gives it the potential to have all sorts of interesting community-built sounds in it. So that gives it a whole added dimension that you're not going to find on any other drum machine. But otherwise, you've got 16 steps laid out in front of you for your step sequencing and editing, that kind of thing. A nice little screen that's very bright and interesting. Lots of little stuff going on in there that can give you a better overview of what's going on rather than having to go through pages across your 16 steps. It comes with 128 drum kits. You've got reverb and delay on the master effects side, and the word on the street is that it's very, very good. Could be up there with the TR-8S apparently. So there's a bit of a battle, a competition, a war waging between drum machines. There's some really great stuff out there. You've got to think about things like the Percons from Erica Synths. You've got to think about the Pulsar 23 from Soma Labs. Very interesting, very different. But then you've got the Roland TR-8S, which has every drum machine within itself. And now we have the Drumlogue, which is hybrid, interestingly hybrid, with the possibility of expansion. So we are spoilt for choice in terms of drum machines. Here's a cool little one, the Intech Knot. The Knot is a little MIDI box, a little MIDI host controller, so that if you have a MIDI controller keyboard that only has USB out, for instance, you can plug it into this and then route MIDI out to your desktop synths without having to have your computer on. It's a very useful little tool that can just sit there and pretend to be a computer, a host for your USB MIDI controllers, and let you farm that out in a bit more of a hardware style. It's all on annoying TRS jacks. However, it has an AB switch, so it will do everything. You just switch it until it works. Keep switching it until it finally works. You don't have to worry about which adapter you plugged into. Thank goodness for that. In fact, you can just mini jack it all over the place rather than even having to go to MIDI cables. It's a very useful box for about $89 and should be out by Christmas. MiMU are the people about the gloves, MIDI controlling gloves. I'm sorry about all the noises overhead. For some reason, they've decided to launch all the jets in the middle of the night to spin around our house as if they're on some kind of manoeuvres. I imagine that they're waiting for the civil unrest and they're just going to be carpet bombing the protests in the streets when they finally occur, when we rise up and take back our own country from these crazy people who are in power. Anyway, I didn't say any of that. This is not subliminally trying to message you to get out there and grab a pitchfork and start poking Tories. No, not at all. So, sorry about the airplane noise. Let's move on. MiMU gloves. Yeah, Imogen Heap and all that. Manipulating sound and synthesis and interesting things. Yes, that's great. We've known about that for a long time. What's going on? Well, they've just released a synth. Well, a little software synth, a software experiment called the Jellyfish. And the idea is that you take a jellyfish and you scrub audio with it. So you get a nice piece of audio, jellyfish. It's kind of a granular thing, but in a bit more of a spongy, soft, squidgy kind of way. You can create drones and textures and all sorts of flimmy, flammy, flibbly, blobbly, blibbly bits. It looks beautiful. It looks reminiscent of things like the Abyss and synthesizers like that, but granular does tend to give you a waveform and stuff beautifully going about it, and this is very much like that. Waveform, jellyfish, beautiful, beautiful. I haven't used it, haven't really looked at it in any detail, but it does look like a lovely thing, and the sounds coming out of it are amazing. So really I just wanted to draw your attention to it, that if this is your sort of thing, then go and check it out, because it's intriguing and enveloping and soft and sort of squidgy, potentially stingy. The Magerit LANIAKEA. It's odd, as soon as I spoke about the aircraft, they've gone. It's like, oh no, we've been spotted, let's get out of here. So they have. That's slightly odd. Anyway, so what we have here is a LANIAKEA. Now the LANIAKEA apparently is a supercluster, and that idea of immensity and epic cosmic proportions is what's been pulled into this rather nice oscillator. To give it this enormity of texture, they've pulled in a number of different sound generators. And in reality that translates to wavetables, a resonator and additive synthesis. So you're using your wavetables to create different forms of waveform which you can then duplicate and add together, or pump it through a resonator to create that kind of that string, that struck sound. But it doesn't end there. They've also got wavefolding, which can bring added textures. They've snuck in a low pass filter and also an overdrive, and all of that is sort of macro controlled by the big shiny knob in the middle. The shiny knob that's also backlit beautifully to further enhance this idea of universal cosmic waves and vibes that are coming through. Are you feeling it? Are you feeling it? Anyway, it has a lot of interesting functions like orbits and space. You know, they've really embraced this idea of a space-themed voltage-controlled oscillator. But in the very short demo video where a guy in his truck goes and gets in a spaceship, it sounds pretty interesting, very different. Not something that you'd usually associate necessarily with modular or Eurorack. It has a lot of interesting stuff going on there, but then that can be sort of the idea of wavetables, that it can bring some very different tones. But in this you've also got that struckness, that strikingness, as well as larger pulsating moving additive synthesis as different harmonics come in. Interesting, worth exploring, I think. Moog have brought back the Model 10. What's the Model 10? I don't know, it's a cabinet modular. I mean, Moog do big format 5U modular modules, which they've used in their Moog Modular forever, and you're never really quite sure if it's something they still make or don't make, or used to make or don't make anymore, because these things seem to crop up from time to time. In fact, a few years ago, I'm pretty sure they reintroduced the Model 10 for an extraordinary price. But in very, very limited numbers, and it appears that they've decided to do it again, but to do it in a larger, more generally available sense. And they've upgraded it as well, so it now works on a non-US power supply, which is nice. It's nice that they were thinking perhaps a little bit more outside their borders for the rest of us, which is good, particularly if you just spent £10,000 on such a device. You'd just like you know, a UK plug on the end. Is that all right? So they've done that, and another few little tweaks and bits and pieces. But ultimately what you get, it's the precursor to the Model 15, which seems to be their most iconic 3-cabinet jobby. This is a single cabinet. You've got a couple of oscillators in there, filters, other big shimmy-shammy bits and pieces, you know, the usual synthesizer stuff, whatever. You know, filter bank, well, I don't know, some other bits of stuff, a few patch cables, bish bash bosh, and you've got a nice sound. Of course, you might need something to play it with, so you can also buy a companion cabinet that's got a couple of those really huge sequencers inside. So, you know, the Model 10 itself's about 10 grand, a little bit. Oh no, well it was $12,000 when I wrote it down, and that was a week ago. So now it's £12,000. See, I would have said it was £10,000, but now it's £12,000. That's nice, isn't it? So we could measure our economy on how far away or how unlikely it is it'll ever afford a Moog Model 10. Yeah, that's a good metric, I think. So fascinating stuff. It's awesome, I think, that Moog keep bringing this stuff back up again, and that there's a market for it and people are hungry to buy into this fabulously interesting technology. It's also interesting that in response, Behringer went, oh, why don't you buy our System 35 for £2.50 for €3 or something from Thomann, and you too can have the completely authentic Moog experience. I mean, they're not wrong. Their Moog copies are great. They sound great. They're very well done. They're not going to fall apart. And, you know, they're of decent quality, extremely cheap, and you can buy an entire System 55, which is much, much, much more than you ever get with the Model 10, for a fraction, absolute fraction of the price. But I don't think that's the point. With the Model 10, you're not just buying a bit of modular, you're not just buying a synthesizer for the sound, you're buying into an instrument, you're buying into an idea and a concept and a lifestyle and a choice and a level of artistry and wiring that has something less tangible about it than cost and value. You're not buying a Moog Model 10 because you want that particular bass sound, that you want a monophonic synth. I know, I'll buy that one. I don't think that's it. I think you're more likely to use any other synthesizer. What you're buying into is the idea of having this thing of beauty sitting on your sideboard or sitting on your desk or in your studio that you can look at, you can touch and feel and enjoy. The sound of, yeah, absolutely, you'll get some fabulous sounds out of it, but will you get 12 grand's worth of sound out of it compared to, you know, I don't know, a TB303? No, probably not. But it won't matter, because the perception that you have through using such an instrument is that it is absolutely worth its weight in gold. So it's interesting. I find it fascinating in trying to articulate the difference between these things, because they're, you know, in some kind of cold, stark light of trying to A/B the sound of one to the other. I think that's a pointless pursuit, because it's not about that. It's about something else. It's about some other connection. And if you have no connection to the idea of a Moog cabinet modular, then that's fine. That's completely fine. But you have to understand that for some people, there will be an enormous connection, an emotional release, or a transference, a transaction between human and machine that I don't think you can value. But that's art, you know, that's just art. Befaco had a modular day in Barcelona at the weekend, I think it was, where they brought together all sorts of Spanish and wider European makers, along with Thonk. I noticed Thonk were there, which is pretty cool, because they do a lot of work together through the DIY of Eurorack modules. But anyway, Befaco's day, one of the things they were able to do was release a brand new module called the Pony VCO. Pony, where did that come from? Pony? It's an odd name. It really is an odd name. But anyway, I've done an entire video on it. It's over here. No, it's not over here, the Pony VCO. It's a nice little thing. It's an oscillator with built-in wave folding. It's very, very small. It's only 4 HP, so it's going to fit in a very compact system. It has an interesting tuning ability, octave switch, and then this slider up and down for timbre, which is essentially a wave folder. It's a wave folder for the sine wave, triangle and sawtooth, and then for the square wave it becomes a pulse width modulation. It's great. It's a lot of features in a single, small, very nice sounding VCO. So go and check out my full review. I go into all the details of what's good and what's slightly weird about it, and then go and buy yourself one, because it's pretty nice. Noise Engineering has a new bundle of plugins. Oh yes, they like to do this. They like to suck the soul out of their digital modules and then rebirth them into software plugins and instruments. And they've done this again. They've got 3 new things for your attention. 3 weird things with which you can make weird sounds in your DAW. There's nothing quite like the Noise Engineering plugins, because they don't sound like anything else, because they come from a modular mindset. They just work very differently, very much into modulation, very much into changing and developing sound and weirdness right from the get-go. Anyway, the first one is the Manus Iteratas, and it's a sawtooth-based synthesizer with 3 modes. You've got Metal, which turns into a 3-operator phase shifting something or other. You've got Skin, which is duplicated into 6 oscillators, making it an additive partial playground. And then you've got Liquid, which adds in a pitch envelope to the additive one. Suffice to say, whole range of different tones in different ways that you can flick between different synthesis modules while you're crafting your sound with all sorts of other bits of modulation and stuff going in and out of it. They call it a shape-shifting synthesizer, and I think that's probably an apt description, or at least as far as I'm going to go right now. The next one is Loqueric Vereror. So I'm getting better at this Latin business. Well, I think so. And this is a complex oscillator. It uses your good old-fashioned analog type waveforms in order to crash into each other to create a routing of FM modulation into another oscillator to produce complex textures. But this specializes in using 3 different forms of synthesis. It uses VOSIM, phase modulation, and then summation synthesis. What are those things? I'm not really sure entirely. One of them is to do with vocal simulations, I think. Phase modulation we're more familiar with. You've got 2 oscillators and running in different phases that then wobble against each other. And then summation, I mean, it sounds a bit like additive. You're going to add some things together, make a sum of something. Oh, I don't know. I think you might just have to go and find out for yourself. And finally you have Immature, which is a delay effect. That's nice, simple, with 32 taps, which is a lot. Now sadly this is not a freeware bundle as one of their other bundles has. This is a payware one, and it's about $119. But there's nothing that sounds like this sort of stuff. So you're looking for experimental and different sounding sounds within your DAW, within your software studio, then these are definitely worth looking at. Now, After Later Audio has a bunch of new modules. The first one is a clever idea. Actually, I quite like this because complex oscillators are everywhere. Complex oscillators tend to be big, fat, chunky things where you've got probably a pair of dials of 2 oscillators which you then route into each other to do crazy, zany, FME, clangy type things. I mean, they're about. I mean, they melt my brain a little bit, I have to say, because I mean, I'm just kind of a fan of an oscillator sounding a bit like an oscillator. I enjoy those sounds. I enjoy analog waveforms just gently pulsing and modulating into each other. That's kind of my sort of thing. But that's not everybody's thing. Some people really like the complexity of getting 2 things and bashing them together really hard till they break. And that's generally what you do with a complex oscillator. But with this one from After Later Audio, they've decided to break the whole thing apart. So rather than giving you this complicated thing that you're going to have to try to navigate, they're going to give you an oscillator and then another one, and then the routing and strange bits between them that we'd normally find in a complex oscillator module, but to provide them in, I think it's 4 individual modules. So you can essentially build up your own complex oscillator with the bits that you want to use and you understand, or multiple bits of a single function that you think would make that more interesting. It's an interesting idea. I mean, you can just buy all 4 and go whap, there's your complex oscillator. Or, as I say, you can mix and match. So it's kind of going to be the module for someone who knows what they're doing. You're going to have to know what your choices are about. So that's a challenge in the first place. But it's a really interesting idea of breaking that down to give you more versatility and more choice over what you're doing. Because honestly, those complex oscillators usually I find completely baffling. The other thing they've done is they've reproduced 3 classic mutable instruments modules, which is great because they are in danger of fading from our lives entirely. They have the Cumulus, which of course is the classic clouds. They have Resonate, which is rings, and Dice, which is a take on marbles. They look great. They've taken kind of the colouring of the knobs from mutable instruments and then put them on their own style front panels. But the look of them is really, really nice. I think they look very well put together and would be a good way of getting hold of mutable instruments modules now that mutable instruments have left that world behind. We're nearly there, I think. So Synthfest is just around the corner. It's not this weekend, it's the weekend after, the 8th of October in Sheffield at the Octagon. And it's awesome. It's the biggest so far synthesizer show in the UK. Lots of people are going to be there, lots of manufacturers, lots of wonderful things to see, lots of wonderful things to play with, loads of people will be there, and it's for the full day on the Saturday. Throughout there will be some seminars also going on with interesting people talking about interesting things, no doubt. But for me, all the interesting stuff happens on the shop floor, where you have people like Modal and Moog and Arturia and Analog Solutions and AJH and Erica potentially, and Thonk and Dreadbox and Befaco. Who knows who's going to be there? Well, we should know because there's a list on the website. But generally speaking, a whole load of different stuff that you'll be able to play on and try out and talk to people, talk to manufacturers, and experience all of this stuff which we won't be able to afford for much longer. So that's nice. So that's Synthfest. It's run by Sound on Sound. They're the big sponsors of it, and it's a great, well-run, professional, large day. I plan to be there. In fact, I am going to be there. I know I'm going to be there. I've already booked. I booked a hotel the night before. I'm bringing 2 of my kids, which is really exciting. I hope they have a nice time. I suspect that they will do for some of it. I imagine they will tire and get a bit bored later on. But hey, you've got to try these things out. You've got to experiment with it. So I will be there. I'll be very happy to talk to anybody who wants to talk to me, to fist bump or shake a hand or whatever. So please feel free to approach me. I can be socially awkward and embarrassed and won't know what to say all the time, but I'll do my best. I really will try hard. And I'll smile and we'll laugh and share a joke. Even if nobody said anything that was funny, we'll just pretend that we did. And then move on with our lives. So that will be lovely. So do come and say hello. I always love meeting people. And I try my best to be brave and courageous at these sorts of things. And then, provided that I get at least 5 minutes to actually plug into something and give it a bit of a play, that would be great. Now, I would like to officially announce... There'll be a lot of these sort of official announcements, but this will be perhaps the first one, and that is there will be next year a new event. Oh yes, a new event. It's going to be in Norwich, my hometown, sort of nearest town kind of thing, and it will be the only show that's ever happened in East Anglia, and it's called Synth East. It's on the 4th of March next year, and it's sponsored by myself, Molten Modular, along with Electronic Sound magazine and the Norwich Arts Centre, which is where it will be. What it's going to consist of, who knows at this stage? It could be anything. It could absolutely be anything. It could be... No, we don't even know yet. But the idea is that it's a day of synthesizers, of modular, of performances, of perhaps panels and talks, demonstrations, stuff to do, DIY, buy a t-shirt, who knows, it's going to be all sorts of things. So we're in the planning stage. Hopefully by Christmas we should have everything more or less planned out, and it's super exciting to be involved in putting together something like this. So do let me know what sort of thing you would like to see. What is it that Synthfest perhaps doesn't offer? What is it that you would like to see in perhaps a slightly smaller, more intimate, more community-led event? Who is it that you would like to see there? Who would you like to have on a panel? Who would you like to see perform? Let me know, because at the moment we're working this out as I go. So it is terribly, terribly exciting. I can't quite get over how excited I am about it. It's going to be awesome. So I will talk more about this, and we can discuss this at the live stream. Now, live stream this week, I know that DivKid's got something going on at 8 o'clock on this Sunday, so we'll just bump it an hour to 9. We'll just make it a late one. We'll do a late one this weekend on Sunday. 9 o'clock we'll kick off and just chat about this and other bits and pieces. I'm sure I've got things I can play you. But put the 4th of March in your diary for next year, and it'll be a fabulous time. And finally, this just came in today, which is the Qubit Electronics Nautilus. Nautilus being the name of the submarine in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, of course, Captain Nemo. I like a bit Captain Nemo. Doesn't matter, the Nautilus, the Qubit Electronics Nautilus. Now, this is essentially a stereo delay, but it's not any stereo delay because this is Qubit, and they do things differently, weirdly differently, creatively, beautifully differently. And I love it. I have a number of their modules. Each of them is fascinating and awesome, some of which I immediately resonate with and do fantastic things with. Other ones I cannot penetrate the interface. But there's never a dull moment with a Qubit Electronics module. This one apparently is something to do with realising topographical movements within sonar dispersions and putting in feedback networks of delays that are spatially interesting. Look, we're back to our jellyfish again. Maybe this has got something to do with the MiMU gloves. No, I don't think it has, but this is delays through sonar pings that then disperse through space and then feedback differently. It has 8 different delay lines, each of which is capable of holding about 20 seconds of audio, which is ridiculous. So it's almost a sampler thing, but it's of course pulling these things in different directions and distorting and regenerating and then reversing and then coming back. It has an interesting mix output that I don't quite understand, which seems to be something to do with CV generation. I mean, what's that doing in a delay module? I don't know. But anyway, it does still have a stereo input and a stereo output, so at least we have that we understand. And a feedback knob. Those things are familiar within delay, but everything else is strange. It's a strange undersea world of fascinating layers of qubitness. And that front panel, gorgeous. Something lovely going on there. So a fascinating module. There's no demos at the time of doing this, you know, so I don't know what it sounds like or what it could potentially do. All we've got is this really juicy word salad of nautical and subnautical aquatic terminology. Which is right up my alley, or at least tonight anyway, because for some reason I am just weird and bubbly today. So I hope that's been fun. So that's it. I think that's probably enough. Let's call a stop to it here. So I hope that was useful and interesting. Coming up, as I say, on Sunday, we'll do a 9 o'clock till late. Get together and chat about anything we've got here, and also Synthfest and then Syntheast in the future. Let's talk about that. So let's get together and do that. That's going to be exciting. But coming up in terms of videos from me, probably the next thing I'm on to is this fabulous vector wave. I think that's probably what I'm into next. I've had a lot of stuff I've had to clear off my desk, but I've got through a lot of it in these last couple of weeks, which I'm very, very pleased about. And maybe that's where my over-enthusiasm has come from today, because I know that I've done that and that's gone, and I did that and that's gone, and now I can start moving into things that I'm really, really interested in. So that I'm going to hopefully spend some time with that this week. Also the Aurora, which is here, which is the qubit weird spectral reverb. So I have that here that I'm going to spend some time with. Want to spend some time with the AES-Q1 sequencer. You might have seen that in some of my videos recently. I did a crazy sort of sequence with the Pony VCO before it was out, just as an example of something it can do. And it's funny how the AES-Q1 just pulls you into this melodic mode, which is nothing like any other sequencer. Because it's got an SH101 style sequencer, you just come up with these tunes from nowhere. You know, they're not intentional. They're just, you know, bash, hold, space, tie, space, gap, bash, and it just comes out. I love it, but it's completely different. It doesn't fit particularly with anything else. Oh, that was the other thing, thinking of it. There is an open mic, electronic music open mic next Thursday. So that will be the 6th of October, I think it is, in Norwich, in the Rumsey Wells. Like it was last time. I am going to try to make it. I don't know whether I can, because it's Synthfest that weekend, and I might just have too much going on in order to make sure that I'm completely free for Synthfest. And I don't know that I'm going to have the time to pull it all together, because I've got stuff going on this week. But we shall see. But there is one. Go and check it out on Facebook. Electronic Music Open Night, Norfolk or Norwich. I can't remember what it is. But if you search for it, you'll find it. It's in the Rumsey Well pub in Norwich, and it's a good time. There's always weird and wonderful wacky stuff going on in there, so do go and check that out. And I will try to be there. I would say I'm 50-50 on it at the moment, so we will see how we go. The other thing I've got is a lot of interesting DIY and lots of bits and pieces which I haven't yet dug into yet. It's also got the MIDI ARP and the MIDI track, a couple of MIDI style things to dig into. Lots and lots of stuff that I could be looking at. And I have lots of other fascinating ideas for videos that are just pouring out of me if I can ever get the time to put them together, which I hope to do so. Anyway, that'll do for now. Hopefully talk to you on Sunday. If not, I'll see you at Synthfest, and we can have a good old chinwag about synths and stuff. And failing all that, just go and make some tunes.